Hello everyone and welcome back to Unspoken Stories. This is the official YSJ podcast promoting the Beyond the Walls Anthology book. Just a reminder to everyone that the book comes out on the May 17th at 6:30pm in the upstairs lounge of the YSJ SU. Hopefully we'll see you there. Book cover is out now as well. I think they promoted it on Instagram. What's the ad for that?
Beyond YSJ.
Beyond YSJ, so you can see the book there. If you've noticed a difference in audio quality, it's because we're not in our usual booth. We are in the office of...
Me, Dr Sam Reese, Senior Lecturer in Creative Writing here at York St John.
So, Sam, who are you?
Who am I? I'm a short story writer, I'm a literary critic, I'm also a jazz critic, and most recently I've been working with the legendary jazz saxophonist Sonny Rollins to edit his notebooks. They just came out, I'll do my own plug, last month with NYRB, and it's been a really long, different kind of project for me, but one that I found really rewarding.
So you're from New Zealand originally?
Yes, that's right.
What made you want to move here to York specifically?
That's a really good question. I mean, if I was being really honest, part of it was that there was a job at York, but a big reason is that I've always been interested in the way that how we change our surroundings and the different kinds of experiences that we're exposed to deepen and improve our writing. And I'd moved from New Zealand to Australia first. I did my PhD in Sydney and lived and worked there for a while after my PhD. And moving to the UK was just another way of kind of having more experiences, being able to travel more throughout the Northern Hemisphere more easily. And yeah, I think York is maybe like a happy coincidence that I've ended up here because it is such a fascinating place. It's a really nice mixture of really rich cultural history, interesting things that are like interesting contemporary life, and it's not too big, and I like that.
It's very quiet.
Yeah.
Compared to the cities, honestly. That's where I came in. But you said you're an established short story writer. When I read up on you, you've got awards like the Catherine Mansfield Award, the Brittle Star Award.
Yep, that's right. Most recently, I won last year the Radio New Zealand Short Story Prize, which was quite fun because the story was then broadcast on national radio in New Zealand. So that was quite nice hearing somebody else read my story out, you know, in a well-produced format with music and things. That was really special, quite like a highlight for me so far.
Very nice. Would you say you're like a fan of the short story format? Is that like your specialty?
Definitely, yeah. And it definitely helped growing up in New Zealand where there's a really strong history of short story writing. I mean, one of the classic kind of masters of the short story form is Catherine Mansfield. I'm sure you guys have come across Mansfield before. I may even have inflicted some Mansfield on you. And I had a very strong experience of not having read Mansfield and thought that I wouldn't be interested in her writing, then being forced to read some at high school and realizing it was amazing. And also realizing that the short story wasn't just something that was kind of like a maths puzzle. I think that was how I'd been taught it before, that, you know, you kind of, a bit like some of the ways that poetry occasionally gets taught at school, where you go, this metaphor plus this simile equals this kind of meaning. Short stories were always taught the same way, and then suddenly I had a great teacher who was like, this is, you know, just this story is opening up a whole world to you through really well chosen kind of moment of insight. And I've been obsessed ever since.
Fair enough. Of course, we are publishing a collection of short stories, Beyond the Walls. The theme for that is Unspoken, just to kind of keep on topic with it.
Yeah.
What does Unspoken mean to you from a literary point of view?
Well, I guess it means two kinds of things. One is that, particularly with short fiction, a big part of the way that the form generates its impact is through the writer gradually suggesting things that they're not speaking directly to you. The most famous version of this, lots of you listening will know, or I've come across this before, is Hemingway's idea of the iceberg theory, where a short story should function like an iceberg, where what's spoken is just the little part of the iceberg that is above the water, and the big weight, the part that's actually most important, is what's underneath the surface, and which you only get hints at from what's popping up above. But I also think the other thing about literature and, you know, fiction writing, but poetry and memoir as well, is that it gives you a space to explore things that in your day-to-day life remain unspoken. So you're able to think through things that are not just things that are taboo, but things that maybe in our normal conversations we don't have a good framework for approaching, or we kind of circle around with other people but never get to the heart of. And for me, that's been a huge part of why I keep coming back to short stories, because I still feel like there's so much unspoken stuff that I want to play around with.
So would you say it's more the subtext that's part of the unspoken?
Yes, definitely. For me, that's what I'm really interested in with the concepts of the unspoken. Subtexts, implications, things that we are kind of, suggesting in some way, but leaving unspoken.
So you've been published a few times in, I believe, some short story collections and all that. There's a Come the Tide.
Yeah.
Anything to you?
Yes, so that was my first collection of short stories, and that was a really special moment, because I'd been writing short stories since I was in high school. I'd been working craft with the short story for a really long time. The earliest short story that made its way into Come the Tide, I'd written as like a first year undergrad. So it was a book that had come together over 10 years and was really, something that was like a gradual process of accumulation, working out what worked and what didn't work. I once said to somebody that I think I probably write 3 bad short stories for every one good one that I write.
Right.
And over the process of working on Come the Tide, the number of bad stories would have been much higher. You're thinking about 10 years worth of lots of bad stories with like 1.5 good stories every year. But there was something that clicked, sort of at a certain point where I realized I wasn't just writing individual pieces, that there was a thread that was connecting what I'd been writing for a long time. And realizing that I had a mass of stories that were both of a quality that I thought was good enough, but also connected in some way, meant that I kind of went from just being somebody who was writing short stories individually to somebody who thought, I've got a collection.
Yeah, cohesive collection.
Exactly, yeah. And the second short story collection, On a Distant Ridgeline, was really different. It was something that came together very quickly and was made up of short stories that were written much more consciously, trying to think about what they're not directly linked stories, but what a thematically linked collection might look like. And I think having that first really slow, gradual process allowed me to learn a lot of things, maybe in a little bit more of a kind of less pressurized way. That was helpful.
When I was doing my research on Come the Tide, and the Platypus Press, the people who published it, they shut down at some point. Yeah,
they did last year, which was really sad, especially since they were not only the people who published both of my short story collections, but I thought the other books they published were genuinely really great, and the editor I'd worked with, Michelle, was just somebody who really helped bring out the best in my work. I guess what it says is that the world of small presses is, especially in the UK, is one where there is a bit of a churn, and there's always a kind of battle between doing something you really believe in with small press publishing and the fact that you don't have the kind of permanence of being part of a conglomerate. On the other hand, in some ways I also think of it as quite freeing. That was one stage of my writing career, and I'm thinking about what the next stage looks like. Yeah, but it is sad.
Yeah. So of course on our module we're doing stuff about publishing.
Yeah.
Do you say you had like a close relationship with the publisher? Did you often talk back and forth, or was there some kind of barrier in between, some middleman?
No, this was very direct. I pitched my first collection, Come the Tide, to Platypus directly. I never even thought about working with an agent, and Platypus were actually the first people I approached. And it's one of those things I often say to students. Maybe I was super lucky with that experience, and it's the one time with a book where the first people I've pitched have said yes to me directly. But that was, I'd really done my research about small publishers here, and I'd found somebody who I really thought was genuinely a good match in terms of the kind of material they wanted to put out into the world.
And what you were making.
Sorry, yeah, what I was making, exactly. That's right. And it really helped that, the editor was somebody who was interested in the kinds of writing I was doing. Yeah, so it was a very close relationship, and I think I really benefited from a situation where I was basically just working with one editor and nobody else. Yeah, that kind of close relationship really helped my style.
Do you have any advice for people wanting to get into publishing or just getting their writing published at all?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest piece of advice is send small bits of writing out and don't be afraid about being rejected by kind of magazines, and especially online ones. There's such a huge range of different publications out there that are interested in short fiction and poetry or essays. And it makes a huge difference if you are submitting a book to an agent or an editor to be able to say, I've already had work published in this place and this place. That really makes a big difference. It's also one of the reasons why Beyond the Walls is so great, because it is like a...
It's the foot in the door.
Exactly, that's it. That's right. It's like a really meaningful line on your cover letter that carries a lot of weight. So that's the biggest piece of advice, is just send work out, and send lots of it out, because you also don't know which pieces of yours are going to resonate with other readers, and often it's the weirdest ones or the ones you're least expecting to.
So your best work that you think is the best will never get published, but the ones you don't think much of.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So with your work, and especially with some scholarly papers that I've seen you've done, there's a big theme of loneliness. Yeah. Does the idea of loneliness, is it attractive to you or something?
I think it's something that fascinates me. I'd say I'm somebody who does appreciate solitude. I like being on my own, not all the time, but I that kind of space is really important to me. But I also think that it's just an increasingly large problem in the world, and that it's something lots of people have remarked on before. It's not really an original observation, but we're in a hyper-connected world where people are more in touch with one another than they've ever been before, and yet what that's created is actually a bigger sense of disconnection. And one of the things that lots of the kind of psychological research around loneliness says is that loneliness is often as much about the narratives that we tell ourselves about our situation, the way we interpret connection or lack of connection to other people, as it is to do with anything measurable about how many people we talk to or how connected we are to them. So I think from that point of view, the relationship between loneliness and literature seems really interesting to me, because stories do have a meaningful way of impacting our experiences of being lonely, and whether that feels like a negative or a positive experience, and the kind of value we get out of the connections we have with other people.
I mean, it's a feeling everyone can relate to as well. So
exactly.
You can really reach out and get a wide audience with writing about loneliness, because everyone's felt it.
Exactly, that's right. It's something that, like you say, is actually a defining human experience.
So you're also a jazz critic,
Yeah, that's right. And this is something that I think has been really helpful for me, in the sense that whenever I've sent work out in one direction or the other, whether it's sending short fiction stuff out or sending jazz writing stuff out, having the other element to my writerly identity means that people are always intrigued, like, oh, you're this, but you also do that. And actually, one of the things that I found really interesting was when I approached Sonny, I'd heard that he was donating a whole lot of his archives to the New York Public Library, and I thought there might be a book in them, so I approached him, sent him a letter. I'd sent him a sample of one of my critical works on jazz, but it also included the fact that I was a short story writer in my letter, and some of the details about my short story writing. And when we talked later on, he said, oh yeah, I thought your jazz stuff was interesting, you had something good to say, but really it was the fact that you were a short story writer. And he said, I don't know much about the literary world, but I know there's not a lot of money in short stories. And so when I saw you wrote short stories, I thought, here's someone who's not out to make a buck off my name. It was the first time the fact that I had kind of negative prestige in the literary world.
Oh, wow.
To him was a big thing, because he thought, it means, you've got artistic integrity or something.
He saw something.
Exactly. Yeah.
What was it like working with Sonny Rollins just on the book?
It was really rewarding in a way that I hadn't anticipated, because one of the things that I found as I was working through the notebooks and talking to him was that he'd wanted to write a book throughout his life, and there were points where he'd really worked concretely towards that, and had come close and then decided to stop for various kinds of reasons. But for him to be able to see something that was a big part of his creative life come out into the world now, he's in his 90s, but for that to come out into the world and to feel that sense of like unfinished business being resolved was really meaningful for him, and made this project really different to just, oh, here are some little stories I've written. It's actually helping somebody I admire, an artistic hero, produce something that he'd aspired towards and had never been able to translate into a finished product. Yeah.
Just a more general question. What would you say your favourite jazz artists are besides Sonny Rollins?
Besides Sonny Rollins. So there are some big kind of classic American jazz musicians I really like. Bill Evans. I've got a sort of poster of Evans up on the wall in my office. The saxophonist and kind of multi-instrumentalist Yusuf Lateef. I've got a little image of him on the wall. But then also, particularly a New Zealand jazz musician, a guy called Mike Knock, who had started out in New Zealand, like me, had moved to Sydney, but then had moved on to the States, and then later in his life moved back to Australasia. He's a huge inspiration to me, both in terms of his dedication to pursuing his own voice as an artist, but also just because a couple of his albums, particularly one called Ondas, or Ondas, Ondas. Anyway, it's absolutely beautiful, and I could just listen to it endlessly.
Are you a big fan of Sun Ra? Or?
Yes, Sun Ra's fantastic, and I don't know if anybody listening has seen. There's a really great sort of semi-documentary film about him, but also just his belief in both jazz as a redemptive force. He tells the story that he was visited by aliens from Saturn who told him that he was going to bring peace to the world through jazz, and that was his mission. But also the fact that he set up his own recording label. He issued all of his own albums. He was kind of, I guess, the jazz equivalent of not just an auteur, but also a small publishing house.
Yeah,
and
he was a character.
Exactly. A real character, but also someone who believed really strongly in kind of independent artists and maintaining autonomy from large media organizations. And that's something I really admire too.
Are there specific like subgenres of jazz that you think like appeal to you more, like free jazz, things like that?
I wonder. I think I'm just quite eclectic in my taste, so I'm really interested in, I guess, in the kind of post-bop music that kind of Sonny Rollins, Charles Mingus were producing in the 50s and 60s, but also, Ornette Coleman's free jazz and the kind of artistic openness that he was able to create really interests me. I'm not snobbish around like jazz fusion and things like that. I think basically I'm really interested in what improvisation does to musical expression, and I think that it's something that gives me a lot of inspiration as a writer as well.
Do you think there's much of a jazz scene in York? I think you of all people would know.
Yeah, there's more jazz here than I thought. When I first moved here, I was not expecting there to be any. I just thought like this is a town for like Vikings, not for jazz. But there's really interesting jazz that's happening here, and I think particularly post-pandemic, there's also been like a real resurgence to what the small music scene in York is like. So yeah, you have to look for it, but it's definitely there.
Any recommendations of where you can look for small venues and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I go to almost any jazz I can at the Crescent,
right?
Just off the Mount outside the walls. But there's lots of places that are kind of springing up that double as kind of jazz venues. I've been to a really good gig at the Bluebird Bakery, which is out sort of heading towards Acomb, or they have really nice jazz at underneath the City Screen Theatre as well, in the basement there. So there are some really good places around, for jazz here.
Very nice. Sadly, we are a bit pressed for time, so I'll just say thank you for coming on the show. The interview's been really nice.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a really great conversation.
just to get more formalities out of the way, again, the book is coming out on May 17th, 6:30, Upstairs Lounge, SU. Thank you for listening, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you next time.